Hey guys, it's Cannon. So, Paul Williams versus Floyd Mayweather Jr. What if? Alright, so I was thinking about a little fantasy matchup between two retired fighters. Two for different reasons, but they are both exceptional boxers. And I decided to make a fan-made prediction video, or at least of what I would think. And that's Paul Williams versus Floyd Mayweather Jr. And personally, let's get started. Alright, so I want to start off with Paul Williams. Paul Williams was a 6'1", 79 reach welterweight and super welterweight in the boxing scene at the time. He was also a southpaw. He was a pressure fighter who threw like millions of punches. It was weird to watch. It was genuinely weird to watch. He would throw like so many punches constantly at such a high speed. Well, not even such a high speed. It's just like such a high volume, and he would throw like crazy amounts of punches that many people could not handle. And one of the things about him was his magnificent reach, and his reach gave a lot of fighters problems. Like when, for instance, Antonio Margarito fought him. Antonio Margarito knew that he couldn't win that fight. Antonio Margarito was a tall pressure fighter himself, but he was going against an even bigger, even better pressure fighter of the exact same style. And when Antonio Margarito would try to land most of the time, Paul Williams would manage to always evade some of his shots and just land more in the exchange. Like, the only time when Antonio Margarito was starting to reach towards him was in the later half of the fight when Paul Williams started to get tired. After that, though, he went against Carlos Quintana. Carlos Quintana was coming off of a complete domination by Miguel Cotto. Miguel Cotto dispatched him quite handily. And, many people would consider Carlos Quintana to be a mediocre fighter, someone who isn't that good or skilled. Personally, for me, Carlos Quintana is a boxer who was at the wrong weight class. You may say, wait, what do you mean? What do you mean by that? Well, personally, for my opinion, he was too big for 147. I felt like smaller fighters with shorter arms would always catch him because he was like a bigger fighter who fought like a small guy in a smaller division. Though I think he should have been at 154 to fight bigger opponents, so his style would have actually worked better. Because when Carlos Quintana fought Paul Williams, it actually worked for him. Paul Williams was such a bigger fighter that his bob and weaving style, his elusive movement was actually helping him. Because when he would fight smaller fighters, it wouldn't help him necessarily. It would just get him caught. The exact same thing happened when he fought Andre Berto. Like, how do you go from beating Paul Williams to getting completely dominated by Andre Berto? Be honest. And personally, for me, I think Andre Berto would lose to Paul Williams, actually. But, styles make fights. Then to get his WBO title back, Paul Williams lands a first-round knockout against Carlos Quintana. Crazy. I was watching that, and I did not expect that to happen. Well, I wasn't actually there in 2008. I'm just saying, like, I didn't expect the knockout to end like that when I first watched the fight on the internet. I was not a fan of boxing in 2008. Around this time, too, afterward, I'm pretty sure Floyd had a era of retirement around 2008. Yep. He retired in 2007 and came back in 2009. He pretty much came back after Paul Williams went up a division. And personally, I feel like it was for those exact reasons. Antonio Margarito, Paul Williams, like, he was going to have to face himself against those guys, and he would risk losing his unbeaten record if he fought those long, tall guys. Paul Williams was a southpaw who could take advantage of Floyd's Philly shell defense, which was only suited better to orthodox fighters than southpaws. And personally, for me, if they fought, I would still pick Floyd. I would still pick Floyd for certain reasons, but I'm going to explain how, right? But I have to continue with this Paul Williams career first. Ronald Wright, because he fought Andy Coley, Verno Phillips first. He faced Ronald Wright, he dispatched of him in a very dominant fashion. Ronald Wright was known for having a high guard and walking up to people and essentially just jabbing them. This did not work though against Paul Williams, because Paul Williams had too much activity and was just going to outland Ronald Wright anyways. Like, there was no way that Paul Williams was going to get jabbed back by Ronald Wright at this point, especially at this time. Ronald Wright was starting to get older. He was starting to get more elderly. It just wasn't working out for him. Then he faces a former welterweight himself, in Sergio Martinez from Argentina. Sergio Martinez was a welterweight turned super welterweight turned middleweight. And when he was at welterweight, he suffered a defeat to Antonio Margarito. And I think if he stood at 147, the same thing that happened to Carlos Quintana would have happened to him. Carlos Quintana looks good and quick against bigger fighters. He doesn't look good and quick against smaller fighters. If Sergio Martinez stood at 147, he has longer reach than Floyd. He's very agile. He has very quick feet. I still personally think a smaller fighter would have dispatched of him at 147. So it was good that he moved up to 150 and 150 and above. But to continue, Sergio Martinez is making a magnificent resurgence in his career, going up these weight classes. And when he fought Paul Williams the first time, people say he won that fight. You know, people like I've seen on many occasions people debating on whether who's won this fight and who didn't, who lost, who won. And people typically claim that Sergio Martinez got robbed in this matchup. The scorecards were ridiculous. Pierre Benoist scored at 119-110, which is extra and ridiculous, you know, which is not true at all. 119-110, bro. That's so ridiculous, man. That's so ridiculous. And Kermit Cintron, after the Sergio Martinez fight, was a boxer who wasn't really seen as much. He lost to Antonio Margarito 2 times by this point, I'm pretty sure. The same thing happened in literally both fights. It was like legitimately the same outcome when they fought each other. Kermit Cintron could not withstand that damn pressure. He just couldn't. And when he fought Paul Williams, he was outboxing Paul Williams, in my opinion. He was definitely outboxing Paul Williams. Like, I think the scorecards are lying to you, because one of them, both of the 2 other ones had Paul Williams winning, while one had the correct scorecard, in my opinion. I don't think Paul Williams was winning any of those first rounds. I think Paul Williams was getting completely outboxed. But he won by a technical decision because Cintron somehow just fell out the ring and was injured. But when I watched the fight, the way how he fell out the ring though was hilarious. Then his next fight after that, he fights Sergio Martinez in a rematch and gets knocked out in the 2nd round for being open.
Oh my God.
That was one of the meanest knockouts that I ever seen. He was asleep. Looked like he was dead. Vicious. That was like a vicious knockout. Like, holy crap. Like, damn. Then he decided to move back down to 135. Back down to 153, super middleweight. And he fights Erislandy Lara. Erislandy Lara was a fighter who almost lost to Carlos Molina when Carlos Molina was younger and in his prime, and gave many boxers problems from his like slippery style and stuff. Erislandy Lara arguably won this fight, and the scorecards don't really depict the exact fight in the first place. People claim that this should have been a decision to Erislandy Lara. He was struggling with a Floyd Mayweather-like style, just with a bigger fighter with longer reach, I'm pretty sure, who was southpaw as well, right? Yeah. And then he fights Ishiba in a dominant victory before he has a paralyzing bike crash or motorcycle crash accident. For Floyd Mayweather, we're going to speak about around the time of 2008 and how I feel. So we're not going to talk about the earlier part of his entire career. We're going to talk about some key points. For Floyd Mayweather, he was a fighter who chose his opponents very, very closely. There were certain fighters that he picked at certain times. We're going to start with Oscar De La Hoya. This is not 2008, but, We're going to start with Oscar De La Hoya. Oscar De La Hoya was a fighter who was at 154 that Floyd Mayweather fought. This fight was very close. It was very close and competitive. And the speed and coordination advantage was not as present as it could have been against a fighter like Paul Williams, simply because Oscar De La Hoya was a former 135-pounder who moved up all the way to 154 for being so big in size. And Oscar De La Hoya's style worked in Floyd Mayweather's favor because the Philly shell does still work with orthodox fighters. The only time where the Philly shell wasn't as effective was when he faced against Zab Judah, who he had problems against, because Zab Judah, for the first 4 rounds, was too quick, too athletic, too fast. Like, could you imagine a coordinated Zab Judah against a Carlos? When Zab Judah in his past used to, when he would be defensive, he would counter with aggression. He wouldn't like try to be all defensive and slick like he was when he worked with Pernell Whitaker. He would counter with more aggression. So I think he would have dominated Carlos. I think he would have dominated Carlos Quintana, in my opinion. And something that I do notice about Floyd Mayweather's career is that he never fought notable opponents who had a significant height or reach advantage than him. All of the guys he's fought typically have a bigger, smaller reach and aren't necessarily the tallest. The guy who was tall himself was Diego Corrales, and Diego Corrales was a fighter who still had a shorter reach. He dominated Diego Corrales, though. He dropped him so many times, like, it was vicious. People want to say Floyd had no power. Like, boy had power. The bigger guys he fought physically were like Canelo Alvarez, and Canelo Alvarez is no pressure fighter. The only pressure fighter in his entire career, some of the pressure fighters in his career were like Jose Luis Castillo, which he had crazy trouble against. He had a lot of trouble against Jose Luis Castillo. And for Marcos Maidana, who was also, I consider like a person who could pressure, he was very awkward though. I don't know if I'd pick him against Paul Williams. I probably wouldn't, especially not Erislandy Lara, man. Erislandy Lara would piece him up. But in terms of styles together, aside from their careers, because what I've noticed about Floyd Mayweather's career is that you have nothing to really compare it to when you fight someone like Paul Williams. The only person you have a closest comparison to is probably someone who has high output. And there aren't many people who are like tall, long pressure fighters on his resume. No, there are pressure fighters on his resume, but not that many. And I understand that, Floyd Mayweather personally didn't want to fight Paul Williams. I think that Floyd Mayweather avoided Paul Williams. I think if they were to actually fight, though, from my perspective, I would pick Floyd Mayweather, because understand and look at what Carlos Quintana did to Floyd. I mean, not Carlos Quintana did to Paul Williams. Now, you may say it's not good to compare because different styles, different fights, I understand. But we still have to pay attention. Floyd Mayweather was fast enough to dispatch smaller, more coordinated fighters with shorter reach than Carlos Quintana was able to do. And Floyd Mayweather was defensively sound as well. It's just that Floyd was less about taking risk and more about staying defensively sound. Carlos Quintana took some risk in this fight. I think if Floyd Mayweather had to take a risk in a matchup like this, he would have taken the opportunity. Floyd was once a fighter who took the fight to someone like Pretty Boy Floyd. Like, that was something that existed. That was something that was a dominant. And we're speaking about like, what if? And as for me, Paul Williams would not be coordinated enough to necessarily catch Floyd. Like, Paul Williams would give Floyd problems with that reach, but I think Floyd would be able to utilize movement and agility and speed to catch like Paul Williams in certain moments. Now, Floyd Mayweather's pop shotting style would not complement against a lot of punches being thrown at his face. Definitely wouldn't. And if he tries to stay like with the Chili Shell, trying to be like a defensive boxer, he may get like outpointed. But if they were to accurately fight, I think Floyd Mayweather would be too quick and too fast for a Paul Williams, despite Paul Williams being a pretty quick fighter himself. But that's like my opinion. That's my opinion. That's like how I would see it. Like, I think it's a debatable fight. It's super debatable, but I have a set opinion about it. And personally, that's how I feel about the matchup. So let me guys know your opinion. Thank you guys for watching. Goodbye.